Wow, that was an exciting speech. And I know many of you here today are either here for the music, culture, or ecology and sustainability. My name is Isaias Hernandez. I'm an environmentalist and the creative behind Queer Brown Vegan. A lot of people always ask me about, radical imagination. And, when Leah invited me to this, I was like, I don't know too much. And I actually look back at some of my personal stories of what made me an environmentalist or what makes you curious as humans. Growing up, I didn't live to see my grandparents. They actually passed away years ago before I was born. And one of those relationships of how I was able to really imagine the ways that I see my ancestors in my work today is through the act of foraging. I see it as the act of ecological reverence. So when I was a small kid, I was always curious about mycelium. I would look at it, smell it, didn't eat it because I didn't want to die, but I actually had this really great curiosity to learn about them. As I got older, I picked up this foraging book from a local library, and I was living in the East Coast. And I remember during that time, it was really hard for me. I was adjusting to a new lifestyle. I was having to, meet economic demands to support my family as a first-generation kid who grew up in poverty. And I just remember the forest was a really sacred space for me to understand the other non-human living systems that are around us. And so when I was growing up, I would hear these very faint memories from my father's side about my grandma, about how she was an indigenous woman in Mexico, and how my dad had lost her when he was only a teenager, and it was a very traumatic and unfortunately very deep scarring experience for my dad, so he didn't really mention her a lot growing up. And one of those days, I was foraging, and my dad sees my Instagram photo, and he comments, and he says, I want to show you something. And I was really shocked because my dad and I are like, he doesn't really show me photos sometimes. And he showed me this photo of a woman that was in a forest. And out of nowhere, I started to cry. And I realized, through that image, even though I never met my grandmother, I saw her embodiments. I saw who she was through that act of foraging, through her being able to really source local ecological traditions. And he told me, my dad was like, it's so strange that you picked up foraging because, I never told you this, but your grandma was a forager. And I remember every time I would go out to these forests in the East Coast, every time I would find a mushroom, and I never really seek to exploit it or to examine it, but to really build this symbiotic relationship with. For some reason, I always felt that someone was behind me, guiding me to find these mushrooms. And my friends would always laugh at me, and they're like, how can you find all of this fungi around you? And I'm like, I think I just have a forager's eye, or maybe I got lucky there. And I think when we talk about our ancestors today, and for a lot of us who have either grieved a parent, a sibling, a loved one, or a grandparent, didn't really grow up with them, I think you can find peace through not only their memories, but the acts of embodiments. I think for myself, as someone who identifies as non-Indigenous, is that the way I honor my grandmother that was Indigenous is that I fight for Indigenous rights. I advocate for Indigenous peoples, and I recognize and listen to Indigenous voices that are super important. So I hope this story resonates with you to reflect your own cultural ecologies and to really find those memories, even if you're trying to find a place to grieve. So thank you so much.